So really, they wanted to use the building as the anchor to take their own data, the consumption data, a notion of what the building is, the square footage, the height, the age, et cetera, and a notion of what's going inside and blend all those things together and kind of data science that up to come up with some sort of answer. So those are some of the exciting things we're seeing where people come to us with some sort of unique challenge that we had not even imagined possible.
Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Today, I'm talking to Carl, and Carl is the president of a company called Building Footprint USA. And as the name suggests, these guys curate and manufacture building footprints for the USA, also for Canada. And once they have this data, they enrich it with a whole bunch of other attributes. But before we dive into the interview, I just want to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by Hive Mapper. That's Hive as in Beehive Mapper. And these are the guys that let you upload video footage into the cloud and have it automatically processed into a 3D mapping layer. And I think the really brilliant thing about this platform is that this video footage, it doesn't necessarily have to contain any metadata, in terms of location. It'll be georeferenced anyway, and it also doesn't have to be looking straight down at the geographic area. This could also be oblique imagery. So this is really cool. It's worth checking out. Okay, let's get into the interview. Hi, Carl. Welcome to the podcast. Now, you are the president of a company called Building Footprints USA. So I think already the audience has a little bit of understanding what we're going to be talking about today on the podcast. But before we dive into that, perhaps you could just take a couple of minutes to give us a bit of idea of your background and how you got involved in the geospatial industry.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Daniel, thanks so much for having me on Mapscaping. This is it's very exciting to be on a podcast like this and being able to have a conversation. So when I think about my history in geospatial and GIS, a lot of it is really accidental. I was in university in upstate New York in the early 90s, and I was doing some computer stuff in university. And I started working for a company that did school bus routing, which was pretty interesting. And then a friend of mine said, hey, there's this little company down the road that needs some interns, and this company is called Map Info. And that was sort of it, this eureka for me, like, hey, I love computers. I love maps, going back to when I was a young boy. And so the love affair began with computer-based mapping.
I love the idea of being an accidental geographer. I think that's brilliant.
It is fun. It is fun when we look at all the people in our industry. Certainly, we have the people that have the master's and the bachelor's degrees in geospatial and GIS, but equally exciting to me are sort of all the people who have taken these very circuitous paths to get into the geospatial and data analytics industry. It really keeps the industry very fresh.
Absolutely. I look at that as an enrichment of the industry, all these new ideas, new people coming in and looking at things with different eyes and solving problems in different ways. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So your company, like I said before, is called Building Footprints USA. First of all, congratulations on having perhaps the most searched optimized name in the history of the internet, because as luck would have it, you also do something with building footprints in the USA. But
isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
We put a lot of thought into it up front. That was very cool the way things worked out there, right?
Yeah, it was brilliant. A stroke of genius. Can you tell me about that? Why? So are you creating building footprints yourself? Where are you getting them from? And what are you doing with them?
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit of the history, kind of the short history of the company. So Building Footprint USA, and as I tell sort of my colleagues, my team members, hey, if anyone comes up with a better name for this company, let's get it out there. Until then, it's Building Footprint USA, and it's sort of this working title has sort of lasted for 2.5, 3 years. So for us, a building footprint is the outline of every building. And by every building, we really mean every building. My single family home, we want a building footprint or an outline for my detached garage. We want building outlines or building footprints for commercial and retail and industrial and multifamily dwellings, et cetera. And that's really the starting point for us. And once we create the building footprint, we try to attribute the heck out of it. So taking a look at each building and saying, what is the address or the addresses inside the building? What is the height of the building? What is the ground elevation of the building? If there's commercial activity in the building, what does that represent? Does it represent retail, commercial, et cetera? If there are demographics, or if it's residential, what are the demographics of the people inside? So we're really trying to create a picture for each building of every single possible thing that someone might want to know about the building for their business problem.
So we've got a lot going on there. First of all, we've got this geometry layer of buildings, which is interesting in itself, and then we're attaching a whole bunch of attributes to those geometries. Could we break it up like that? Could you tell me a little bit about the geometries first? Where do they come from?
Yeah, great question. So, I think we've had the luxury over the years. We've been around a while, and we've had the luxury of looking at companies like Here and TomTom and others out there, and trying to figure out how do you create this data at scale? How do you create any data set at scale? And we thought and contemplated that problem a bit early on, and we thought, hey, we need to put a number of bets down on the table. We need to think about more of a curating process where I have many different ways of creating the data and assembling the data. So the first thing we do is we're voracious open data users. If the city of New York has a GIS team creating great building footprint data, they're going to do a better job at creating that data than anyone else could from the outside. So if they're posting that data to an open data site, we're grabbing that data and incorporating it into our portfolio. Where data doesn't exist, and there is some data that exists in the United States and Canada. Canada, we have a Canadian product, great open data policies in Canada, probably some of the best that we've seen. In the United States, sometimes you have organizations, counties or cities that have data, but they hold it really close. Sometimes we're able to kind of pry that data out of people. But where the data is not obtainable or doesn't exist, we manufacture it. And we have two main strategies. So we are as huge consumers of LiDAR data. LiDAR data is excellent for manufacturing building footprints, and manufacturing building footprints from LiDAR gives you height of building, ground elevation of building. And then we also manufacture data using sort of these machine learning based image recognition techniques where we can look at high resolution orthoimagery and glean or discern where the buildings are, and therefore where the building footprints, what they look like.
Okay, so they seem like all really, really good strategies, but immediately it sounds like there's a lot of work there. I mean, putting together a network of data layers that you can pull from and updating that. So that now what I'm talking about is, of course, the open data that's around that you're pulling together, as well as manufacturing your own data. That sounds like a huge project.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's a huge project, but it also is a differentiator. Being able to smartly and at a low cost figure out how do you continuously keep this data up to date. If the city of wherever in some state is continuously every 3 or 6 months putting out an update, how do you go and grab that data set? How do you look at a recent LiDAR data set that becomes available and manufacture off of that? And how do you look at even blending some of these sources together? There are several counties in the United States where our data comes from 5, 6, 8, even 10 different sources, and we sort of intelligently blend the data together to create the notion of best data for the county.
I like it the way you so calmly talk about this, but we're also talking about doing this at scale. And I think it's one thing to do this across a city, to maintain a data set across a city, which would be a challenge in itself. It's a whole nother thing to do this for the entire US, to add Canada to the mix, and to be looking out across the borders and saying at some stage we'd perhaps like to be doing this across the world. I think scale really adds that level of complexity, which I think a lot of people would perhaps underestimate in terms of difficulty, what it takes to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Daniel. We often refer to ourselves as lucky. I suppose you make your own luck, but you think of some of the ingredients that we have available to us. There's just enough open data available for us to start building a product. Technology and software and hardware is available at just enough scale to make cost of manufacturing things reasonable. We have just enough ingredients coming out into the public domain, LiDAR data, imagery data, that we can hook on to. And certainly as a sort of a small company, you have kind of the luxury of just saying, hey, we're going to take this thing that we're going to do and just focus on this and not worry about sort of the bureaucracy and nonsense that often happens in large companies. So you combine all those things together, and really we've gotten lucky that there's kind of this great confluence of events and scenarios that have made it easy for us to start this company and scale it up.
And when I hear your story, it sounds like you're taking advantage of a few different things that, or sort of reoccurring themes that I see out there in the market right now. And the first one is definitely that idea of curation of data over creation of data. And obviously, you're doing a little bit of both, but that curation gives you a real head start. And of course, being a smaller company, perhaps that being laser focused. We're not doing everything. We're doing this one thing, but we're doing it really, really well. I hope the listeners have an idea of where the vector side of your data set is coming from now, where the physical building footprints are coming from. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about these attributes that you're attaching to the buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to put every single bit of information possible on the building, and we use like cooking analogies a lot. Sort of the building itself is flour. We say, okay, hey, we have the building, we have the flour. Now, what are you trying to make? We can give you the cinnamon, the sugar, the vanilla, currants, whatever. If you want to make scones, if you want to make a cake, we'll give you a set of ingredients. So we liken our attribution to a set of ingredients that sit on the shelf. So the interesting question is where do some of these ingredients come from? Well, in both the United States and Canada, we're able to draw from a huge wealth of open addressing information, going to cities and counties, drawing data from assessors and emergency 911 agencies and local GIS departments. And it was our belief early on that we would go out and collect this information ourselves, both to keep costs down and also just to get the freshest data possible. It's interesting. I'd give a shout out to openaddresses.io if any listener hasn't heard of it. Great, fantastic website of several people who are just passionate about kind of curating and assembling open address information. We use that as a reference. So we gather all this information and think of it as just a huge database of address information that we then blend with the building footprint. For things like height and ground elevation, we manufacture that ourselves. It's interesting. If you take a look at any single variable that we have or that we create, and we have to make a decision. For building height, we looked and said, okay, we could create from LiDAR all this complexity of an average roof or pitch of a roof, buildings that have multiple roof components, et cetera. And we said, hey, let's just create a single variable. We'll just say, hey, what is the average height of the roof? And then we went out and tested that on the market, talked to telco companies, insurance companies, other users of that attribute. We decided, hey, that was good enough for now. So certain attributes we create ourselves, like building height. And then we also engage a network of data partners. There are a lot of exciting companies out there, from the info groups creating business list data, companies creating assessor data, companies that have been out there for a long time that we can develop partnerships with, some data companies, data partners out there that really no one's ever heard of that have exciting assets that we can bring in. And then there are a host of new companies creating really exciting attribution that we can blend into our data as well.
So that's a whole lot of attributes about the building itself, and that fits in really nicely with the fact that we're talking about building footprints. So that makes perfect sense to me. What about derived things like values or information about the neighborhood where the building is? That kind of thing. Is that something that that the market is asking for, or that people are interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. People may want to impart sort of a broader attribute onto the individual buildings, or they may want to take two different data elements that come from two different sources, and using the building as the anchor, they may use that to kind of the building, it acts as the anchor to blend different data sets together. A great example, and we're continuously surprised by people who come to us and they're like, "Hey, could I do this with your data?" And so a great example came up where someone said, "Hey, we're a energy analytics company. We want to evaluate the sort of the energy consumption characteristics of every single commercial building in this very large area." We said, "Great." They said, asked them, "Okay, what do you want to know?" They said, "Well, we want to be able to take a look at consumption data for every building, how much heat, electricity, et cetera, are being used in every building. And then we want to cross-reference that against the physical characteristics of the building. What's the height of the building, the square footage, what's the age of the building, what's the roof type, et cetera. And then a notion of what's inside. If there's commercial activity, is it white collar office workers? Is it industrial manufacturing? Is it computer software companies inside the building, et cetera? So really, they want to use the building as the anchor to take their own data, the consumption data, a notion of what the building is, the square footage, the height, the age, et cetera, and a notion of what's going inside, and blend all those things together and kind of data science that up to come up with some sort of answer. So those are some of the exciting things we're seeing, where people come to us with some sort of unique challenge that we had not even imagined possible.
And I think buildings in themselves are really interesting, and this was an idea that sort of jumped in my head, or I started thinking about when we had our first call about this interview, and it occurred to me that buildings are really islands in the middle of this landscape, and what's happening inside the buildings is not necessarily reflected what's happening outside, and of course these sort of mini ecosystems, they change all the time. Businesses come and go, different families move in, buildings are used for different purposes. So I think it's a really interesting data set that you've built when you start looking at them as little islands and then attaching these other attributes to that.
Absolutely, and you look at sort of the impact of islands against neighboring islands. How does what's going on one island kind of influence or project out certain behaviors or things that happen on other islands? Does an island or a building have some sort of gravitational force that attracts certain things in neighboring islands? That's a great metaphor for some of the things that we see people looking to do with our data.
So I think we've established now a little bit about where the data comes from, how you put it together, why you put it together in that way, some of the attributes that are interesting for the people you're looking to serve, and you talked a little bit about a specific case study there in terms of energy, how much energy was being used in these different buildings. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about some other case studies or what other people are doing with this data.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. So, I go back to whenever I talk about industries that are using our data, I go back to sort of our origin story at Building Footprint USA. Our origin story is that we thought we would create a better data set for location based marketing. And whenever I talk about location based marketing, I sort of almost needlessly put my phone in my hand and hold it up because that's representative of what location based marketing is. Daniel and Carl and Joe and Jane, they walk around. We all walk around, and our phones track us, and we give permission, willingly or maybe unwillingly, for different applications, carriers, et cetera, to look at our location and figure out how that should define how a company can market to us or understand how they're influencing us, et cetera. So we put out our data set really and originally for these location-based marketing companies, and the use case or the business use is, hey, if Carl walks into a building, what's in that building, and based on that, what can we infer about Carl, and what can we infer about how we should have a relationship with Carl? And that was really the starting point. And the exciting thing for us was, and it shouldn't have been a surprise, we're data people. We've been in this business for a long time, and we know that data is very sort of fluid and fungible and endlessly reusable and derivatable. I don't know whatever the word would be, and so within a couple of weeks after putting out our first product, we had insurance companies and telco companies coming to us and saying, "Hey, can we use your data to solve our business problem?" And of course, we said, "Heck yes!" Even though we really didn't quite know if our data was applicable to other use cases, we said, "Hey, we're a startup," and things expanded. So let me talk about a couple of industries that use our data. We have several of the largest telco companies in the United States that use our data. And for them, it's all about a few things. It's all about uh, companies that are making enormous investments in 5G network planning. And these companies are saying, hey, I need to understand if I put these 5G nodes down on the top of telephone poles, on the top of small towers, et cetera, how do buildings influence negatively the projection of my wireless signal? So being able to provide someone a building and a basic height lets them look at kind of the physics of wireless network propagation. In addition, these companies are saying, hey, if I am also building out fiber optic service or fiber optic network, if I'm thinking about putting a network connectivity into a building, what's actually in that building? First of all, what will it cost for me to run a network to the building? And then what's in the building? Give me a sense of the residential makeup, the commercial makeup, et cetera. And so we're excited. These companies in telecommunications are finding that our data is just better than the previous state of the art data sets that they're using. Those examples make sense. Do you want me to keep going on a little bit?
No, that was perfect. I think that gives the audience a sense of what this is used for. And I think, again, I'd really like to point out here that I'm imagining at least that these are big companies we're talking about, and they're probably not interested in just solving this problem for a certain city. I could imagine they're interested in solving this problem for a wider geographic area. So again, we're back to this idea of scale. Does the scale? Do we have a data set that is scalable? And can we provide answers at huge geographic scales?
Yeah, when I think about one thing I'll mention about scale, sorry to interrupt, Daniel. What we often find when we deliver our data to a company is, these companies may say, hey, we know that we're going to use your data for A and B, and then we often work with these companies to give them sort of that license or permission to see if D, E, F, G, whatever use cases are available. And that to us is exciting, that we know we can get our data into an organization for some specific purposes. But there are a lot of smart and creative geospatial people out there that, when they get an ingredient, um, when they get cinnamon for the first time, they may say, okay, of course you can bake a cake with cinnamon. And then someone says, right, rightly or wrongly, someone says, hey, I didn't even know I could put cinnamon in coffee. Now, some people might say that's, heresy or whatever, but it's just an example of people take ingredients and they'll push the envelope ingredients, whether it's, cooking or geospatial data. And that's what makes this business fun.
Absolutely. So you've got this huge data set, and of course, if it's going to be of value, it needs to be maintained and updated. And I remember talking to you in the pre-interview, and you were saying that you don't try and update this thing all at once. You do it in sections. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you update it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we think of the ingredients that we have available to us, and the things that we want to do, we certainly want to keep the building footprints themselves as up to date as possible, the address information as up to date as possible, and the kind of the linkages to every single other bit of information as up to date as possible. And you think of all the things that happen in, to use your metaphor, Daniel, in all these islands. Islands get created, they're born, they live, and occasionally they die, or they get kind of reconstructed a little bit or expanded, et cetera. So, for a small company like us, we place some bets to try to figure out where where the best bang for the buck is, and also to be reasonable about what we can realistically do each quarter. So what you'd see every quarter, we add new coverage, we go in and review existing coverage and tuck in updates wherever possible. We might pull in a continuous stream of Postal Service data from either Canada Post or the U.S. Postal Service and blend that in. But oftentimes we're prioritizing what areas to focus. And that prioritization comes from a number of different angles. Certainly we look at high growth areas, the Phoenixes, the Torontos, the suburbs of certain big cities in the southeast, and we try to focus on those. But we also know that we get customers coming to us asking for the areas that might not be as obvious. So the areas like a energy pipeline company comes to us and says, hey, can you make sure you're building out the most accurate picture of the Texas Panhandle, where the population per square mile or kilometers is very, very low, very rural areas. So we oftentimes have customers that are pushing us to build out areas as quickly and as accurately as possible in some of the non-obvious places.
So I realize that we're sort of going backwards a little bit in the conversation now. Perhaps we should have tackled this earlier on when we were talking about the data, but I think this is a really great idea because all of a sudden it takes this humongous problem of scale down to a size that you can deal with, because I don't have to update the whole US at once. I don't have to update all of Canada at once. Or, I can focus on particular neighborhoods if I want and just sort of move through the data set continuously, picking and choosing and updating and making decisions on what areas are updated based on demand, perhaps. But I think it's a really interesting approach. And it reminds me a little bit of the idea of caching on demand. So if I have a web map service, and I can cache on demand and say, okay, these areas that are being used a lot, I can cache them and update them perhaps once a month or as changes come through, instead of having to update or build an entire cache at once. And I think that's a really, really clever approach. So a couple of interesting things with building footprints have been happening lately, and I want to talk specifically about what Microsoft is doing. So in the last little while, they've released millions and millions and millions of building footprints for Canada, or first off it was the US, and then earlier this year it was Canada and Tanzania. How does this destroy your business? Does this add value? What does this mean for a company like you guys?
Yeah, so this to me is sort of the excitement, both the fun excitement and the stress of a small business. The story of the Microsoft building footprint data is fascinating, and we applaud the technical achievement. We applaud Microsoft releasing this data in the manner that they did. And I still remember back in, I think, roughly June 2018, we received the first email from someone who said, hey, did you see what Microsoft did? And obviously your initial reaction as a business stakeholder when someone does something like this is, oh, how bad is this going to be for us? And when all of a sudden you're competing against free, and competing against free can be very challenging. What we found out, though, is it actually is 180 degrees different than what we originally thought. We originally thought this is a huge competitive concern. We're competing against free, and it turns out that people realized what the data is. It's a massive data set of building footprints that's available for anyone to use, and what it isn't. So the data does not come with any form of attribution. The data has certain license restrictions that limit its use in commercial applications. And between those two things, it became less of a competitive threat and more of an enabler. It lets anyone out there, as with any OpenStreetMap data set or OpenAddresses.io data set, it lets anyone experiment with building footprint data at scale. And that's fantastic. Anyone can go grab tens of millions of building footprints and see what it looks like in their application. For many uses, it's good enough. The example I can think of is the New York Times did a story where they did a graphic that showed sort of where population is, and they used the building footprints to create this amazing image. So for some users, it's more than enough, and other users experiment. They quickly find out what isn't present. Oftentimes, the attribution is what they focus on. Then they look around and say, "Hey, is there a company out there that actually has building footprints and attribution?" And as you pointed out, Daniel, our business name is highly searchable, and someone types in building footprint data, and boom, they find us. So again, it's fascinating the way things work out sometimes, where something that is a huge concern becomes one of the um, biggest enablers that you could have had as a business.
I love the fact that you're so positive about this, because this is my take on it as well. I mean, yeah, you could see them as a competitor, but you can also see them as an enabler. So Microsoft has essentially gone out and said, "Hey, everyone, we've done this thing here." Firstly, they've told billions of people across the world that this is possible, and it set everyone thinking, "What could I do with building footprints? When will they do it for Europe? When will they do it for Australia, for Asia, for these other countries?" Because I'm thinking that that kind of thing is on the way. This will come, and that'll set a whole bunch of people thinking about what they can do with it, and then that creates a lot of opportunity in the market.
Yeah, very, very well put. And I think there is this spirit, whether these data sets come from commercial companies that are doing things that are, have an altruism to it. I don't know what exactly Microsoft's motivations were. I wouldn't even begin to guess. But in the end, there's this huge altruistic effect, and really, it's similar to the open data initiatives that happen uh, every single day in thousands of local governments, where local governments say, "Hey, we don't know exactly how this is going to benefit our community, but we think that if we make this data available and open, that we're paying it forward, that somehow our community will benefit." So, and in the end, it's companies like ours that like Building Footprint USA that benefit from these incredible acts of sort of openness, open data, and altruism.
Absolutely. Hey, I've just got one more question for you before I let you go, and this question is, what is the thing that you're most excited about? Where do you see the most opportunity in this space?
Yeah, so I could sit here. There are many questions I could sit here and prattle on about for hours, and bore the mapscaping audience, and it's tough to even sit here and think of one. To me, the most exciting thing, and I touched on it a couple times in this podcast, is the stuff that we can't even imagine. With data sets, you make a data set, you make it available, and people's creativity, geospatial professionals, GIS professionals, data analytics people, data science people, or people who just sort of have an idea, look at the data and say, "Can I do this thing with the data?" And to me, that's the exciting stuff. Just as a business owner, hopefully we, are able to make money based on other people looking at our data, and be able to find new things that they can do with the data. But also, it's just intellectually invigorating when you see someone create something new based on ingredients that you've produced. And we're capitalists, that's for sure, but we also love seeing people create, and those two things together. We flourish when we're able to get our ingredients into the hands of creative people.
Yeah, and personally, I can't see why they should be mutually exclusive. I think they can live together, definitely. Hey, Carl, I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me. It's been really enlightening, and it's just really nice to talk to someone who is so positive about the industry. I really appreciate that, and you've shared a few stories which I really hope inspire other people and give them perhaps the boost they need to go out there and create something and do something new. Before I let you go, could you just let the audience know where they could go to learn more about you and follow along?
Absolutely. So you can find us on the web at buildingfootprintusa.com. We're on Twitter as well, LinkedIn. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter, Building Footprint USA. Or, as we point out right early at the beginning, we are very searchable. on the internet. So Google and building footprint, and you'll find us. Looking forward to starting a conversation with anyone.
Thanks again, Carl. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Daniel.
So at the top of this interview, I talked a little bit about my sponsor, HiveMapper, and I mentioned about how you can upload video footage to the cloud and have it processed to 3D mapping layers. But what I didn't mention is that they've got this really cool feature that also lets you segment images. And this is done automatically. So there's no training sets required, there's no pixel signatures required, and it's repeatable. So I could do this for every single layer that HiveMapper creates for me, and I can automatically segment images into show me all the buildings, show me all the trees, show me all the water, where is the pavements. And they have another really cool group there, which is called mobile, and this is all the things that can be moved, such as vehicles, boats, cars, aeroplanes, people, and animals. I have no clue how they do it, but I think it's cool. It's worth checking out. And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and I want to remind you that you are more than welcome to reach out to me for whatever reason on social media. To do so, you'll find some useful links in the show notes of this episode. I would really love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. It's much appreciated, and I'll see you next week. Bye.